What was supposed to be the next big thing, but totally flopped. This one might be a bit obscure just because I've only ever met one other person familiar with it, but Google's Project Era modular smartphone was looking like it could have been the end all be all of smartphones, based off the phone block's idea of having a Lego-like hot-swappable module phone. The idea was that you could switch out any components of the phone on the fly: camera, fingerprint scanner, even different quality screens. Conceptually, it really looked like it could take over the phone market, as it would lead to people not having to buy whole new phones anymore, but rather replacement or upgraded parts to a phone they already liked, thereby reducing costs and increasing utility. You don't want a phone with 5 cameras that inflate the cost unnecessarily. Just buy a 1-camera module. You want a 144p Super AMOLED screen to replace your 720p regular screen. Buy one and swap it in. However, like many Google projects, it died off for myriad reasons, and the long-standing era of $1,000 smartphone slabs lived on. That's basically their business model. I read somewhere, ages ago, that Google was willing to try just about anything their R&D people put out there, and if it didn't look like it was going to be a billion-dollar return, they'd can it and move on. Also, a lot of things they cancel have features that end up in their mainstream projects, like the conversation view, mail categories, tripping, snoozing from inbox are all just part of Gmail now. That was a lesson on how not to handle hype. There was so much hype around Google+, it was infectious, but they refused to open it up to everyone and maintained a very hardline invite-only system. Even once hype had peaked and there was a notable decline, still they maintained a small invite-only system. I remember by the time they decided to open it up to everyone, the hype was well and truly dead, and no one bothered with it. They should have cashed in when hype was high, but they, I assume, got greedy, thinking the hype would just infinitely increase and people wouldn't get bored waiting to get in. I never watched more movies in a month than when I had MoviePass, such a horribly consumer-friendly concept that was never going to work long-term. Unfortunately, after I ended my subscription, they signed me back up at least 2 more times, without my consent, but I caught on and cancelled before they got any more of my money. They originally announced those on April 1st. They said it wasn't an April Fool's joke, but I'm still skeptical. I saw plenty of social media posts from people saying, hey, this is a joke, but I kind of want it. I think Amazon saw those and took a shot at making it a real product. I bought one for toilet paper and put it in the cabinet where I keep spare rolls. You take the last roll out, you press the button. It actually kinda worked. Google Wave. It was supposed to replace email with a more collaborative approach. Essentially, it was like a dynamically created discussion board you'd share with select people, and you could have a more readable discussion than one with a bunch of forwards and CCS, and the like. I thought it was a good idea, but it flopped big time, and Google got rid of it after a few years. I'd say the way they should have done it would have been pushing it to education first. That's another reason Wave probably failed. Most students in America are using at least one Google Suite tool per day right now, and if kids had been exposed to Wave and taught how to use it, they probably would have kept using it into adulthood. I know my students will keep using Docs and Sheets over Microsoft Word unless a workplace specifies they have to use Microsoft because it's what they know how to use already. Honestly, one of the most successful marketing tools in technology is getting students onto platforms first. Facebook is a prime example of that. That streaming service that lasted like 2 months, Quibi or Quibi I think. Even bad timing aside, a mobile-based streaming service at a time when no one could really leave their house, the marketing was just horrible. I saw ads for it for nearly a week before I realized it was a new video streaming service, and by that point was so annoyed by the ads and trusting everything I didn't care at all, just out of spite. Also, I mean, it was just YouTube you have to pay for and got worse content. Edit. It was Quibi. It made so little impact I couldn't recall at first. The Divergent series. It was supposed to kinda have a Hunger Games concept and all and try to be a replacement. The last 2 movies ended up being so unwatchable. Edit. If anyone is reading this and still gives a shit, I would like to mention another movie adaptation of a novel. The Giver. Book was great. Movie was terrible. It was almost nothing like the book, and if you read the book, then this movie will make you mad. Jonas is supposed to be 11, turning 12 at the ceremony of 12. Instead, They cast a motherfucking 25-year-old to play a 12-year-old. So they bumped up Jonas' age to 16, which was dumb. The movie also got Asher and Fiona's assignments wrong. Rosemary didn't even appear in the book. Didn't she apply for release 5 weeks after receiving her assignment and was never seen or heard from again? Rosemary and almost everyone else was supposed to be 12, but they were played by grown-ass adults, so their ages got bumped up, which was dumb. If you're gonna be in charge of adapting a novel into a movie, then please, actually read the book. Don't just skim through it. I'm reading this book again in class, and that means, yep, I'll have to watch this movie again. Hydrogen cars were a promising new form of motorized vehicle. They were supposed to be incredibly good for the environment, emitting only water as the exhaust. They exist, but not like how some people imagined. I was a pretty big hydrogen car believer at the time. There are some hydrogen stations, but mostly centered around California. Thing is that the hydrogen is quite expensive and not very efficient compared to smaller engines, hybrids, and EVs. The hydrogen is also somewhat inefficient to produce, store, and distribute as well. You can actually get a hydrogen car though. They're out there. The Toyota Maroi is a really good example. Out of all hydrogen cars, that one is definitely most popular. In fact, Toyota pays for $15.00 worth of hydrogen in your first few years of ownership since it's so expensive. This means that for your first 3-ish years of owning one, you might not have to pay a penny in fuel. As you can see, I'm still a hydrogen advocate. Don't expect to be able to take it very far from your nearest hydrogen station though. I used to work at a direct competitor to Theranos until 2014, and we had employees that left to go there. And also some Theranos employees came to my company. One coworker had interviewed at Theranos, and his interview was at Elizabeth's house on a Friday night. One question she asked was, how good are you at keeping secrets? Theranos was hot on the media. I asked a coworker who had come from there what it was like. Why do you want to know about Theranos? She asked reflexively. She was later mentioned in Bad Blood by name, and had quit after defying orders to falsify data. It sounds like she was bullied by Theranos lawyers after leaving as well. One of my coworkers left to go work at Theranos. He was an engineering manager and led a flashy lifestyle. Apparently, he showed up the first day in a new Ferrari. Everyone said he got a huge signing bonus. He was wealthy, but not that wealthy. He is a friendly and personable guy. I suspect his soft skills were highly valuable to them. One of our principal microbiologists said a few times that their technology was impossible. Some of the diseases they claimed to be able to diagnose with a single drop of blood had markers in low enough concentrations that the odds of getting one in a drop of blood was very unlikely. We knew they were scamming early on. If they were public, we all would have been buying shorts. This one drop of blood marketing. If you're going to break the skin, why not get 2 drops of blood? Why not 100? It doesn't hurt more to collect extra blood. Complete lack of critical thinking by the media. As a big thing, it was a failure, but there was a lot of great niche uses for this product that never got explored. It's sad that Kinect didn't last long because it wasn't a major money mover. I worked in senior citizen services for a little all-in when we got a Kinect. It revolutionized the place. It was shared with a few other SCCS, and we had it in Tuesdays, and a Microsoft guy would come with it to help set it up and instruct the members. They loved it. It was so great to watch them bowling and playing keeper in a soccer game, or playing some of the simple little mini games. Some of the seniors who would just sit there all day got up for only the Kinect. It was nice. WeWork. Well, of a classic case of something that was a good idea and actually at the right time, though was made to flop by being run into the ground by an unbalanced leader, who was right about the ideas being timely and useful, but completely overselling it and taking a bunch of salivating venture capitalists down a primrose path. It also didn't help that so much of it was really a sham and almost a Ponzi scheme. It's not always about being the wrong idea, even the right idea, at the wrong time. Sometimes it's just led by the wrong person. Star Wars. The Old Republic was supposed to be the World of Warcraft killer. It was honestly a good game, but they bought shit on launch by having too many servers, leaving them all feeling vastly underpopulated, making what little endgame content there was worthless since you couldn't find groups to do it with. Edit. Lot of responses saying a lot of games market themselves as the WoW killer. This is true, But a lot of the hype wasn't coming from the marketing in this case. It was actually coming from players participating in the beta, and rightfully so because the early game is solid, and there was a good population on the beta server S. The thing that made Facebook work was ubiquity. Everyone was there, so it was useful for maintaining your social network. But then Google Plus did the stupid invitation-only thing at the beginning. So it was basically the same thing as Facebook, but barely anyone was on it. Edit. Yes, Facebook was exclusive at the beginning, but it was something new. It filled a niche that didn't exist. It wasn't just a clone of MySpace, with no significant differences. Edit 2. Since all my inbox replies are basically the same, here's what I'm trying to say. Facebook's exclusivity was a plus when it was launched, because it had the hook that only college kids with n.edu email could join. By the time Google Plus came around, it had become a generic platform that everyone could join. Google Plus tried to emulate that without the hook that made the exclusivity valuable at a point where everyone was already using a similar service that everyone else was already on, so there was no value in migrating to another site that was basically the same thing. Betamax was actually pretty big for a while. VHS just surpassed it because the tapes had longer play times initially via extended play modes, which meant you could fit an entire football game on one tape, something you couldn't do on beta initially. It was a big deal because recording things off TV to watch later was the primary purpose of these tape recorders. Pre-recorded content like movies wasn't a big draw at first, and they were really expensive to buy, like $100 or more for one movie. Sony introduced longer tapes later on, but it was too little too late. Obviously, there's the myth that VHS won because of porn, but that's not true. There was porn on beta. Sony created the format, but you can't dictate what the tapes are used for. They weren't in a position to allow or disallow porn on their format any more than JVC was with VHS. VHS won because the tapes could fit more content than beta. My point is that since the telephone came into widespread usage, there was this sense that the change to audio and video was inevitable, and that it would become the default way to communicate over distance. Until the cordless handset became affordable, you were required to be in a specific location to make or receive a phone call, and their projections of telecommunications developments of the future were predicated on phones being in fixed locations. What I'm saying is that I don't believe video calling will ever supplant the text message as the default way to transmit short informational messages. Video calling may gain popularity for chatting and socializing, but the text is more or less here to stay for short messages. Nobody wants to go through the "Hi, how are you? I'm fine. Did you see that thing?" So, the reason I call this preliminary thing for simple, informative statements. If you go all the way back to the 1930s through the 2000s, there was this assumption that the public wanted video calling, and wanted it to be the default method of contacting people. This was completely backward from the truth. The overwhelming popularity of SMS, text messaging, demonstrated that the public wanted less, not more. Not saying that video conferencing doesn't have advantages or uses, and isn't popular in those spheres. But the idea of a video call being the default form of contact is something futurists assumed would be reality that never came to be. We definitely have the technology for it. There's just no need to physically lock eyes with someone, or even have to hear them just to tell them to get milk. The Apple Newton. Kids, before there were smartphones, there were these things called PDAs, or personal digital assistants. Touch screens weren't a thing yet, and this early in the development of computer technology, writing things by hand was still pretty popular. Enter the Apple Newton, a device that could be written on with an electronic pen, and its software would recognize your handwriting and convert it to neatly typed reminders on your calendar, etc. It had two problems. 1. It was exorbitantly expensive, and 2. It often didn't work. If you wrote a word in your horrible cursive, the Newton might interpret it as an entirely different word. So if you wrote bake, it wouldn't come up with something close like fake, it would come up with something entirely different like robe. Not only did it fail, but it failed so spectacularly that it caused other companies to steer entirely clear of the concept of handwriting recognition software. Currently relevant to gamers, Dale in Wonderland, a cute platform adventure with the same aesthetic style, and by the creator of Nights into Dreams for the Sega Saturn, that completely bombs in the gameplay department. The reason it fits into this thread though is because the creator, Yuji Naka, was so confident in it that he established a subsidiary of Square, the company, called Balan Company, expecting to turn it into a franchise. I was genuinely hoping it would have been an awesome game, because the concept of monster costume powers is cool and reminds me of the game in New Game, plus second season of the anime. But every review that's come out has been extremely negative.